On this episode of China Unscripted, with the next U.S. president still up in the air, the future of U.S.-China relations remains uncertain. Will there be a U.S.-China reset? Hi, welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
Well, we're certainly in the midst of a pretty interesting historical period, eh, guys?
It's interesting that our last episode was about the South Korean voter fraud allegations.
Wait, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the McRib coming back.
Oh, yeah, of course.
When is the McRib?
December. I'm so excited.
All right, we're going to McDonald's.
Oh, yes.
I've never had a McRib.
Oh, Shelley.
Have you had a McRib?
You don't know what you've missed.
Yes. You've never had a McRib.
Never. Why is this hard to believe?
The problem is the corporate globalist elites are preventing the American people from having access to the McRib.
But isn't McDonald's basically a global corporate company?
No, it's not. There's this battle for control of. I'm peeking like crazy. Wow.
You got to work on your Alex Jones.
Yeah. How does he do that like nonstop? Like that's who he is.
I don't know.
Did you see him on the Tim Pool podcast?
I feel like his voice is the way it is because that's how he talks, and that's what makes his voice that way. And so it's like it's ongoing.
Like a spider fly getting caught in its own web.
Yeah.
That's an Avatar reference.
Okay. I was like, what's a spider fly? Guys, I just came back from vacation, so I'm just really...
Well, having not gone on vacation myself, it's been a fun couple of weeks, Shelley.
Yeah, actually, somebody messaged me on Twitter and asked me if I was still alive. Because I hadn't tweeted in like 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
I know.
That becomes how people monitor life and death. Are you tweeting? Are you Facebooking?
Are you okay? Yes.
Well, people say, are you parlaying? What's going to be the verb for these new right-wing?
I like parlaying.
Parlaying. Me-weeing. that doesn't work.
I feel
Me-wee-wee.
I feel like maybe they could have come up with better names.
I made a me-wee-wee. A me-wee.
That one's just not.
So I remember there was a time when the New York Times's editorial policy was to not use the word tweet. It was like you had to say the full thing, like sent posted a tweet or posted a message on Twitter.
Yeah.
Wow.
Posted something on Twitter, like you couldn't say he tweeted something.
I performed a search on the search application known as Google.
Do you remember in the Facebook movie, The Social Network?
Yeah.
Like where they got really excited when somebody used Facebook as a verb.
Oh.
That was
I don't remember that.
Yeah, that was like one of the things when they're still in college and they're making Facebook that they decided that they really made it because somebody said Facebook.
Verbed it?
Yeah.
I still call it the Facebook.
Are people gonna someday say, "Hey, that was China Uncensored"?
No, that's not how this works.
No, probably not.
We're not a social media network.
Thank goodness.
No, it's funny because we were talking before we started recording about like how the '90s portrayed the internet with Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad, and what was the other one we were talking about?
Johnny Quest?
Oh, yeah, the 90s reboot of Johnny Quest where they went into the virtual reality Quest world, and it was like CGI.
Well, kind of, yeah.
Well, yeah, it was like a normal cartoon show, but when they went into Quest world...
It was like 3D animation.
Yeah.
But really terrible.
Yeah.
There's that... Do you remember that Aerosmith music video? I think it was for Amazing, and like she puts on these like Oculus Rift type things, but this is like 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Are you sure it was 20 years ago?
I don't know how long ago things were, but like, when was the last time I watched MTV? It was like the 90s.
Right, so that would have been more than 20 years ago.
Anyway, look, I'm not that old.
I just want to point out that we got here from my McRib.
Okay, yeah. I was like, are we talking about China? What happened?
China, or were we talking about the election?
We're talking about the election. And then the last podcast that we had done was about allegations of voter fraud in South Korea. And I remember thinking at the time, like, that's interesting because it could happen in a modern democratic country.
Not like Belarus.
Right. Well, obviously it happened in Belarus.
Well, yeah.
But... I mean, you mean not a modern democratic country?
No, like without quotes, democratic country.
Yeah. And here we are
Yes.
with allegations of voter fraud in the U.S. election.
Well, and I think that the part that's relevant here is that the next president of the United States is still obviously in limbo. And
No, wrong. I don't want to hear that.
I do feel like now is the time when I just want to like la 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 la. But of course,
Someone let you know when it's over.
Yes, I'm signing off of all social media for the next however long this takes. Somebody let me know what happens.
I do sometimes think longingly of like, at the end of a dynasty when, everybody was like the emperor is corrupt and then like all the officials just went away to become hermits in the mountains.
Yeah. I will not eat the grains of rice from the Zhou dynasty.
And then, they went and like wrote poetry
Yeah.
in the mountains.
the mountains about their enemies and then just like lived a pastoral life.
Yeah. Except none of us are very good at poems. So
Speak for yourself.
Oh?
I mean, I haven't written a poem since college probably, but
Do some freestyle right now.
No, that's not how it works. I don't do like slam poetry.
No?
No.
So I don't know if this is a good idea or not to try to get us back on topic, but I think that what the next U.S. president is going to do in terms of China policy is obviously a somewhat relevant issue. And it's an issue that the Chinese Communist Party has been considering, right? Which is obviously they haven't loved the last 4 years of U.S.-China policy.
And not just the Chinese Communist Party, but there's a lot of corporate interests that would really like to see things go back to the way things were before the Trump administration as well.
Right.
I mean, not just corporate interests, I think. There's universities who want to work with Chinese universities, think
Get that
tanks.
Confucius Institute, think tanks.
Like there are a lot of people who are invested in U.S.-China engagement. So
Definitely. And we've seen the king of U.S.-China cooperation, Henry Kissinger, rear his head again.
You know he's 97 years old.
I was just wondering how old he was. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean he doesn't look young, but I mean he's in good shape for a 97-year-old.
It's amazing what adrenochrome can do. Am I right?
I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. It something that's going to bring us down like a weird rabbit hole again?
Let's carry on.
Okay. I don't know what it is, but like in context, I know it's one of those things that you would find on 4chan.
No. Is this an Alex Jones reference?
Let's just say it's a reference to Maze Runner, my favorite movies.
Okay, so it's something totally different. I thought it was going to be something that like Alex Jones sells on his show.
Wow.
That's what okay.
Wow, if he does. I mean, who knows what's in super male vitality.
So what a U.S.-China policy, huh?
No. We have to go back to Kissinger because...
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that is U.S.-China policy, but go on.
Is it?
I mean, he is responsible in large part for decades of U.S.-China policy.
I mean, I think even Trump had gotten advice from Kissinger. Like, I think he's advised pretty much every sitting president since Nixon.
Wow.
On China policy. So
yeah, and also I think that his China policy in the 1970s was based on the geostrategic needs of the U.S. at the time. In the height of the Cold War, where the Soviet Union was perceived as a very serious threat, the Soviet Union was funding these kind of communist cells around the world. And Kissinger and Nixon hoped that by establishing warmer ties with communist China, it would be a counterbalance to the, I guess, at the time, arguably worse communism, the Soviet Union.
Obviously, well, I mean, it was also that the U.S. was directly competing against and in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and China was kind of not directly involved.
Right.
They didn't have the kind of military they have nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, I think that at the time, the Chinese Communist Party wasn't really a threat. I mean, yes, the U.S. had kind of, had been involved in the war over Jinmen, the little Taiwan island that had been bombarded with shells and stuff by mainland China. But like, besides that, there wasn't that level of conflict, and there certainly wasn't a concern that China had a modern military.
Well, I mean, they were still just got done killing a bunch of their own people.
Yeah,
and they still haven't stopped that tradition.
Yeah,
well,
really
that's
haven't,
true.
Shelley.
They haven't stopped. But I was just thinking
they kill different people now.
Well, so the point is, like, you're saying that maybe at the time, the sort of Kissinger-style school of thought about how the U.S. should deal with China may have made sense. But in the 21st century, it's stupid.
So Kissinger came out and said at the
Bloomberg New World Forum, New
New-
Economic
the
Forum,
Bloomberg New
New
Economic.
World Order,
Wow.
reptilian hidden agenda.
Okay,
How-
do you want to
how-
get us banned from YouTube?
Oh, gosh, no. I should say this is a result of them going on vacation and me staying here and working. I'm a little on edge.
Okay,
I need a break.
maybe we should take the coffee away.
It's a hot chocolate with espresso.
That
So that's still
sounds
coffee.
worse.
Yes, but with sugar.
All right, we're off to a good start.
Okay, so at the Bloomberg New Economic Forum, which, by the way, the funniest thing about that was you go to their website and one of the first things you see is like a little like QR code in the corner that's like, join the conversation about the Bloomberg New Economic Forum on WeChat.
Which the U.S. has called a national security threat.
And then you scroll down and it's like leadership, and then it's Henry Kissinger and Hank Paulson, the former U.S. Treasury Secretary. And which
There's Tony Blair was there, former UK Prime Minister.
Hank Paulson was with which bank before he became Treasury Secretary?
I don't know, but if I had to guess, Goldman Sachs.
No. He was
Well, there's just so many Goldman people end up becoming Treasury Secretary. But anyway, he was with one of the big banks. Yeah.
yeah. So it was really, just like a picture. And of course, it's Michael Bloomberg.
Mhm.
Right.
And they had this is the third year of the Bloomberg New Economic Forum, and the first year it was held in Singapore, and the second year it was held in Beijing. So you kind of get a sense of what this is
Where
all
it's
about
going.
from all this. So, what did Kissinger say?
Why don't you tell us, Shelley?
I don't have the exact quotes in mind.
He was quoted. I think I sent this link to you because it was in CGTN. Or like
Yeah.
it was like a Chinese state-run media that was quoting Kissinger saying that the U.S. and China need to go back to cooperating again.
Or
And
it could lead to something like
Sorry, I'm getting a potential spam call.
That's okay. We can carry on. Don't cut this. This is au natural. Well, he was also specifically calling on Biden to work on resetting the relationship with China. I don't think he used the words reset.
Well, yeah,
But I
it
mean,
was like we need to go back to cooperating because we can't compete with China indefinitely. right?
Otherwise, this will result in a catastrophe on the scale of World War One.
Why did he choose World War
I was
One?
wondering that. Why not World War II?
yeah, I do feel like World War II would be more relevant. But anyway,
It's the first World War he remembers. No, he's not old enough for that. But
well, no. I mean, Kissinger would remember World War II certainly because he would have been born in 1923.
I know I was
So
joking.
after World War One, but yeah, yeah. I mean, he's old, but he's not that old. But the point is that he was talking about the equivalent of a U.S.-China reset. And I remember during the early Obama years, there was like, let's do a Russia reset, right?
Yeah.
And like it worked.
Also Iran.
An Iran, yeah, and like those things kind of seemed like they worked, but then they really didn't, right? I think the challenge with doing a reset is in the short term. It feels like okay, like phew, we're reestablishing this like broken or contested relationship, but in the long term, the problem is that authoritarian regimes, whether it's Russia or China or Iran, like they're looking to take strategic advantage of anything, right? And so they see a reset as a soft policy, and then they will use that to, they'll take advantage of like the U.S. wanting to have warmer relations, and they'll take advantage of that to get the U.S. to look the other way when they've, gradually violate more and more agreements or WTO regulations or whatever.
It's basically what's been happening over the past several decades,
right.
where you've seen China get increasing influence over international organizations like the UN. The other thing that happened, I think, while you were away is that wonderful UN Human Rights Conference where, Saudi Arabia, North Korea, China were criticizing the U.S. for how bad its human rights was.
I mean, what a human rights violation it is here in America that we let women drive.
Ooh,
Says Saudi Arabia.
yeah.
Well, I
I got
think
it.
you can technically drive now as a woman.
I think they changed it in 2018 or something. Which also 2018, like that's kind of waited a while.
I think you have to have a male guardian in the car. I'm not 100% sure. There's something that you need permission or yeah.
Yeah, and in Iran, women need permission to leave the country. Like they need permission from their male guardian or husband.
Look, the U.S. needs to fix its human rights problems, Matt. Like, let's get that clear.
So I didn't follow. So it's
My main point is that we've seen China gain more and more influence over international organizations. Corporate interests in the U.S. have been very keen, especially we've been seeing a lot of editorials in the past couple of months about saying like, oh, invest in China, invest in China. This is going to be
CNBC
good.
is so bullish on China.
Yeah, it's not just them though. I think there's just this general like cottage industry of investment advice that's always about like how to invest in China, that kind
Right.
of thing.
And I think the investment firms and these kind of companies that want to do business in China have traditionally had a lot of influence in Washington, and they had a lot of influence during the Clinton administration, pushing for WTO, during the Bush administration, during the Obama administration. I think less so during the Trump administration, or certainly Trump wasn't willing to listen to them.
Well, there was the case where I believe this was the TikTok WeChat ban when they were talking about that you saw a lot of the big tech companies, as well as like other big corporations, like calling the White House and saying, don't do this, please
Yeah.
don't do this. And then there was a press conference where I think Trump was asked
by a reporter.
What about these businesses, that this might hurt them, and he was just like, who cares?
No,
He said whatever.
Whatever.
I was like,
Even
that's
more to the point.
It was a very like unpresidential response for him to just be like, whatever. But like also it was the right attitude, just kind of like a very undiplomatic way to say it, right?
Well, nobody's really accused Trump of being too diplomatic, have they?
I don't think so. But these investment firms, like if you look at like campaign donors to the Biden administration, again, this is not Biden being unique in this, but you've got Bain Capital and Sequoia Capital gave like $2.5 million to Biden, and those are like private equity, right? So they have investments in China. You've got Wall Street firms that are they want to buy access to Chinese stocks that are listed in the U.S. They want to be able to just invest in different ways, right? And so they're, as is the case basically in almost every country, like historically. So this is not really unique with Biden or anything, but just they're constantly pushing. So there's this level of pressure of help us get back into China, restore relations so we can have this. And then you have like on the opposite side, you've got like the national security intelligence people who for a long time, have been warning like China's more of a threat than it's being publicized and so on. So you've always kind of got these warring factions, right? And I think what we've seen over the last 4 years, but really especially the last 1 year, is that like the Trump administration has been firmly on the side of, paying attention to the, intelligence advice and the military advice that there's a real threat here. Whereas a lot of times the Wall Street types have a lot more influence. Of course, certainly that's where the money's coming from.
I mean, I think it wasn't necessarily that clear that it was going to shake out that way early on in the
Trump administration?
administration.
Oh, no, not at all. Right. I mean, he spent years talking about, we're going to have a trade deal. It's going to be the best trade deal.
I mean, I think the national security people pretty early on were clear about their stance on it, because in 2017 there was the new national security strategy that was released that talked about China, in this way that now the Trump administration has been talking about, especially in the last year, in terms of like the great power competition between the U.S. and China and this kind of stuff.
And specifically labeling China a strategic competitor instead of a strategic partner.
But, that was kind of balanced by, like people like Stephen Mnuchin, or like who wanted more kind of engagement stuff with China.
Yeah.
But like that's pretty much changed dramatically in the last year.
After the coronavirus, sort of the breakdown of the trade deal.
I think that I saw a statistic that from Axios that the Trump administration has made 150 different policy actions on China so far in this year.
Trump even is continuing to do this, talking about it seemed like they're still trying to move towards decoupling the U.S. and China economy. There was the executive order about companies can't invest in companies tied to the Chinese military. That happened recently. The SEC is working on potential new guidelines on.
Yeah, I think
what was that?
Well, the SEC is like an independent federal agency, but
Independent with quotes, but that's not a rabbit hole I want to go
No,
down in this
but-
episode.
I mean, there are Republicans and Democrats appointed to the board, right?
Yes.
But the chairman is appointed by the current president.
Yes.
So, but like, yeah, the SEC kind of cracking down on the whole, which is insane if you just think about it, the idea that Chinese companies are allowed to list on US stock exchanges and they didn't have to show their, like, prove their audits.
Right. So
to-
basically,
yeah,
the way it works is that like every company listed on the stock exchange has to go through an auditing process. And the regulatory agency is the PCAOB that handles that. That's not important. But the point is, it's just a universal requirement. You have to get audited, right? So there's no fraud happening, obviously. And then the SEC made an exception that like everyone has to be audited except Chinese companies, because we're going to make an exception for them because the Chinese government classifies Chinese companies' internal documents as state secrets.
But there's no link between these companies and the Chinese state at all. No.
Well, technically, they were still being audited. What was happening was they were being audited by the Chinese branches of U.S. auditing, accounting firms, like PricewaterhouseCoopers or whatever. But like it would be like the Beijing branch of PricewaterhouseCoopers is auditing, Alibaba.
So sus.
But then
Highly sus.
they're not allowed to show some of those documents to the PCAOB or to the SEC. That's where the state secret thing. So technically, they're being audited. You just can't check to see if.
Right. But the point is that there's been an enormous amount of fraud and corruption that hasn't been caught, but it does affect ultimately like the value of those stocks.
And
right?
U.S. investors who, not just U.S. investors, you think of like some monopoly man kind of investing. Like these are.
Is that how?
That's how I think about things.
Yeah, but even
or like Jim Cramer or something.
But
Jim Cramer, monopoly man. That's my concept of money people.
But also just regular folks who have their money in the stock market.
Well, I was
and
thinking
like
more
ETFs,
pension funds and like colleges that.
endowments and stuff.
Yeah. So a lot of people are invested in China in ways that they don't even know about.
Institutional investors.
Yeah. And so this puts U.S. investors at risk of a lot of fishy things in the China market. Like there's the case of Luckin Coffee earlier this year that was caught in, what was it, a $300 million fraud?
They supposedly inflated their revenue by $300 million.
Yeah.
And then, of course, their stock collapsed. They were delisted from NASDAQ. And then they're still trading on like one of these like not reputable exchanges.
In fact, you sent us an article today.
Oh yeah, it was from, I don't know how reputable from Investor Place, and it was called "Suppress Your Distaste and Give Luckin Coffee a Chance," and it was the idea that like maybe I think this is like one of those things where like this is the cottage industry thing where it's like there's this industry of people trying to give investment advice to people, and it's for people who kind of want to play the stock market.
Yeah, I mean, normally when I think of suppress your distaste and coffee in the same sentence, I think of Starbucks. But
but like this, I mean, Luckin Coffee was supposed to be like a Starbucks killer, actually.
Yeah.
But then the whole idea behind this article was that just because they had this huge scandal, like doesn't mean they're not a good investment. If you want to take a risk.
And prices are low right now because their stock dropped like 89%.
Which is very representative of how a certain segment of society is thinking about U.S.-China relations.
Well, I mean, even in this stupid article about Luckin Coffee, like it was kind of like, reasons to be bullish about it include the fact that the Biden administration may do a reset of relations with China. So like that could cool the tensions between the US and China, which could make, investors more interested in putting money in Chinese companies. So now is the time to get in,
And Biden is kind of responsible for a lot of this kind of talk about China because he has been pretty unclear about what his specific China policies would be. For instance, he still has not answered the question he was asked on NPR, what would he do about the trade tariffs? he still has given no answer about what he would do. In general, he's kind of been critical of the trade war, and I know he has some advisors, potential advisors, who have also said that the trade war is not the right way to do things. So in general, Biden has been critical of the trade war. His whole thing has been, in general, we need to be tough on China, but the way Trump has been doing it has been wrong. We need to do it with sort of this, multilateral cooperation, working with allies.
Yeah, I mean,
But that's still
although
very vague. And so this is why I think you do have people saying like, oh, maybe Biden is going to do a reset. Maybe it will go back to the way things were before.
Well, but I kind of agree with Biden that it would be great to do, to get all the allies on board to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party.
Well,
The challenge is that it's unbelievably difficult to get allies to do that because so many of our allies in Europe, for example, they don't want to stand up to the Chinese Communist
Germany's
Party.
a great example of that.
Yeah, and they have so many vested interests, corporate interests, and so on in China that like we should be working with allies. I totally agree. But if we can't get the allies to stand up to China, then what we should not do is work with allies to water down our own policy.
I think that, like, when people talk about how we're not working with our allies on China, it's not really true. It only is
Mhm.
really true about Europe, I think. And like you were just talking about, it takes two to tango. Like, if the allies don't want to work with
You've never
you on
seen me
something,
tango.
because it takes two. Is that why?
No, I'm saying
Did you dance the tango by yourself?
sometimes.
Suddenly, this got really
Chris.
sad.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the other allies that have been working with
Well,
the
I
U.S.
mean, I
on China.
think Australia, India, Japan,
The
right? The
Quad.
Quad. That's really big, and I think especially because
Trump
Australia
never skips leg day. The gym bros will get that.
Yes, the Quad.
I really don't want to think about Trump's legs, but now I am. Thank you.
Salami comes to mind.
Oh,
He's been building relationships. He has been building
Taiwan,
alliances.
right?
Taiwan, actually, all of
a lot of Southeast Asia, Vietnam.
Mhm.
Like, you wouldn't actually Vietnam was one of the countries that Obama reset.
Yeah.
During his term, and actually ended up working out better than I would say either Russia or
Yeah.
Iran.
Well, also, but the thing about Vietnam is like, firstly, they're a communist country still. They're sort of like what China was in the 80s in terms of politics, which is that it's definitely still communist, but there's more leeway for people now than there was before. And they're not just like wantonly killing people like before. But I think Vietnam would be a danger if it was like a big, powerful country with a powerful military. But allying with them now, while they're not strong and are an important ally in countering the China balance, in a way, it's a little bit like our China policy in the 1970s. But it's just that Vietnam isn't really a threat to us.
No, and I think it's mostly related to South China Sea issues.
Yes.
That, like, again, there are U.S. allies that don't really necessarily want to work with the U.S. on China, like the Philippines.
It's kind of mixed
it's-
there.
I think the Philippines will change potentially with their next president. And Duterte is out, next year? Because you get 1 5-year term in the Philippines, right? So it remains to be seen, because Benigno Aquino III, the previous president, did want to work with the U.S. And, ultimately, the U.S. kind of failed the Philippines over the Scarborough Shoal, which we've talked about before. But part of like Duterte's whole thing is that like the U.S. isn't going to come to our aid. They're not a trustworthy friend. And he was elected in he took office in July 2016 or something. And so his whole campaign policy was that the Philippines needs to reevaluate its alliance with the U.S. But now, with the Philippines being under more and more threat from the Chinese military, I think the Philippines is going to go through a reevaluation stage before the next election.
Possibly. But
You're giving me a look, though.
No, I was just thinking about the Filipino elections. 4 years ago we were in the Philippines, guys.
yeah, and 2 years ago we were in Jinmen.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Remember when we could travel around the world?
A year ago we were in Hong Kong. which we
Yeah.
can never go back to.
Oh.
That's a whole other
sadder
thing.
than thinking about you tangoing alone.
Yeah.
That's why I tango alone.
What?
Remind me never to have a chocolate and espresso during a podcast again.
The
It was a
true
mistake.
culprit.
It was a mistake.
Well, I mean, I think my concern with like a potential Biden administration and how they will deal with China is I think there are two issues, right? One is like a philosophical or policy difference in how the Biden administration may think about the U.S. relationship with China versus the Trump administration. Like the Trump administration is, really laying out this whole great power competition thing and the idea of like we need to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party. We need to, you know, confront them now, and it needs to be like a whole of government, whole of society thing because that's what they're doing.
And Trump has been very clear about condemning communism in particular in a way that I haven't heard a U.S. president before.
Well, I mean, probably not since like Reagan.
Yeah. Do you think the concern is that Biden might reset it to what the U.S.-China relationship was in the Obama administration?
There are potential Biden, appointees that are in favor of a more engagement
and
policy.
who were engaged in the Obama administration's
Right.
China policies.
A lot of his advisors are from the Obama administration. I think.
Yeah, and I think that, well, I mean, this is all still kind of up in the air because they hadn't talked about who exactly would be in,
And the election is still going on.
Well, kind of, yeah. But like I think the issue is like there could be a policy difference or like a
Mhm.
philosophical policy difference. That's one thing, right? And you can argue about that. Like I think I read something from one of Biden's advisors, Eli Ratner, where he was talking about, well, it's the Cold Wars are like it's not a Cold War between the US and China. That's not the right way to look at it. But we do have to look at it as in terms of like, oh, there's certain things we're going to need to compete on and certain things we're going to need to cooperate on. And you can have, debates about whether that's the right like policy, like I think that's one thing. But I think the actual probably what I'm more worried about is the political side of things, which is it's not that like necessarily like, policy wise there's so much disagreement. I think because now bipartisanly there's an agreement that the Chinese Communist Party is a threat in many ways, and we can't just roll over, right? So that's not just a Trump administration thing. But I think politically the danger is that the Biden administration will be pressured to reverse Trump administration policies for political reasons, whether or not that's a good idea or not policy wise. Like, so for example, maybe, he'll just cancel tariffs, not because of whether they're advantage or disadvantage to America, but because Trump put them in, so you got to take them out.
Right. And also there may be pressure from like U.S. retailers or whatever, or to, reduce the tariffs or U.S. manufacturers, right?
I mean, like Biden's already pledged to like undo certain things that the Trump administration did, like rejoining the WHO, rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement. So there are things that they're going to do because undo because the Trump administration did them. My concern is how much of that is going to affect the China side.
Will that affect Taiwan? What will
Right.
be what would be a Biden administration's take on Taiwan?
Well, I can tell you what's not going to happen with Taiwan under probably anyone else but Trump, and still possibly not under Trump, but which is to actually establish formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan and treat them as a country formally. The only person who would probably ever do that is Trump, just because like that's a kind of thing that Trump would do, like regardless of what the perceived consequences of that are. And
Well, it was interesting that recently Pompeo, even after the election,
oh my gosh,
November
he
3rd.
used the C word.
What?
Well, Pompeo said like it's not a part of China. Did he
called
say
it a country.
Did he call it a country? I
think he said Taiwan's not a part of China.
Yeah. So he didn't use the C word.
Oh, he didn't.
Matt.
Okay, good.
That's such slander.
But President Tsai Ing-wen has used the C word to describe Taiwan, calling her country a country. How dare she call her country a country?
Yes, we did this whole episode about that.
Yes.
And I think, in her situation, like, I think the U.S. relationship with Taiwan is really a matter of life and death for her, because if China ever does take over Taiwan, well, there was that Global Times tweet where it's like, I don't think her health would hold out.
Yeah, but also when you see what the Communist Party has done in Hong Kong, like, of course, like no one would want that for Taiwan. Well, I mean, certain people would want that for Taiwan, but
Well, it's not a question of what would other countries want that. It's what would other countries do if China made those moves.
yeah, that's a really important policy
the
issue.
decade of concern with that was Jim Fennell, right?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, the idea that China would do an invasion of Taiwan, take the political
hit, yeah.
hits, and then be confident knowing that by the time of the 100-year anniversary of the Communist Party,
Everybody would be
2049.
forgiven, or
Yeah, it's the Beijing Olympic things. It took 20 years for people to forget the Tiananmen Square massacre, and then you had U.S. presidents in Beijing marveling at the wonderful.
Well, technically, it was, yeah.
Yeah, it was about 20 years. That's all it takes to forget horrible. That whole never again
For 20 years.
Yeah, that was all. Well, I won't go into that tangent.
Whatever that was, probably it's good that you're not going down that.
Yeah.
I
was going to go and talk about the Milgram experiments and yeah.
Okay. But anyway, so in terms of U.S. policy towards China, there is, I believe, a real danger of a reset of that relationship because the philosophy behind it is that it's better to have a cooperative relationship. And I think that a better way to look at it is that a positive relationship is good, but only if certain more important conditions are met. Like having a positive relationship is not the goal, even though it's good. I think that having a relationship that protects the U.S. interests and protects freedom and our values is more important. And we need to achieve that in our security and whatnot. And then if we can get a good relationship within that, I think we should strive for that, but we may not be able to get it. And we have to just understand that you can't always get everything, but you have to get the most important things. And the danger is thinking that the positive relationship is the important thing, is the goal.
It's like an abusive relationship. You don't stay in an abusive relationship because you want to preserve the relationship. And that's what the U.S.-China relationship has been. It has been an abusive relationship where the U.S. suffers for it. So there's no point in cooperating with that.
Well, I think... Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I choose you, Shelley.
You know what? I completely forgot what I was going to say.
It's just, that doesn't matter. Just keep having words come out.
Just keep talking.
Just keep talking. That's the
just keep
media
talking
landscape.
Until you come up. I think the whole thing about the positive relationship being the most important thing is a good point because there was an interesting statistic I saw that the kind of government to government interactions between the U.S. and China had gone from 79 official interactions last year to 21 so far this year, which is a huge drop. There's reports in Hong Kong media, which it can not necessarily that reliable necessarily, but there are reports that the Biden team is already talking to China, that they're already kind of trying to reestablish communication and try to up the communication between the U.S. and China. And so I think that's one of the things where if you just measure by how many times have we interacted and if the goal becomes trying to get that back up, as that's a policy goal,
could be dangerous.
I feel like the Democratic Party has done a really bad job over the last 20 years, recognizing the abusive relationship, as you put it, or recognizing.
Well, the Republican Party too. Bush did not do any wonders for the U.S.-China relationship.
Yes, but ideologically, I feel like the Democratic Party failed more ideologically, and the Republican Party under Bush also failed, but in a different way, right? But the ideological thing is that okay, so there's support for workers' rights, right? Better wages for workers and so on. But what's happened in the last 20 years is that American jobs have been shifted to China, where they're being paid the equivalent of $2 an hour, and they don't get benefits, or
sometimes actually being slave labor.
Yeah, so that's an opposite, right, of Democratic Party values. You've got China is one of the world's biggest polluters. They're releasing an unbelievable amount of carbon into the atmosphere with their coal-fired plants, and they're not only are they not like toning it down, they're actually building more coal-fired power plants. That goes against Democratic Party principles. They are massively overfishing in regions where they've made deals with countries like Mauritania and over in the South Pacific, like Palau and Kiribati and so on, like taking the fish. So environmental destruction. They're taking away jobs from native people. You have these like big Chinese conglomerates taking jobs, and so like you have all these things that the Chinese Communist Party and their state-run industries are doing that are antithetical to what Democratic Party values are here in the U.S., and they've been completely ignored. The Democratic Party has refused to kind of acknowledge those problems. The Republican Party has also done a really bad job on China for most of the the last few decades, but in a different way, because the Republicans, I'm only saying that they weren't ideologically against it, right?
Well, I think that like actually what happened is that the foreign policy of the Democratic Party is that um the US shouldn't impose its will on other countries. So, the Republican Party is more the party of like, you know, there should be freedom and democracy around the world.
But also free trade, at least until the Trump administration. It was kind of like free trade, low tariffs, globalism.
In all this, you do have to acknowledge, though, that whether you're talking about Democrat or Republican governments, they were getting advice from think tanks, etc.,
and that corporate money, that sweet corporate money
that was already infiltrated and influenced by China. So all administrations have been getting very bad advice.
I think it's a good thing that Donald Trump never listens to anyone's advice.
Well, I mean,
I'm not actually, he probably does, but like, there's certainly that perception that he doesn't. And he does certainly do his own thing, right? Irrespective of what people tell him to do. He might listen, he might listen and then ignore them, right? But it's his own direction.
But I think that like, the Trump administration's China policy was not like just because of Donald Trump, right?
Yeah, I mean, you had Peter Navarro sitting there.
I mean, there are a lot of
Pence
people.
has said things.
Miles Yu, like, oh my gosh, I forgot the name of the guy who speaks Chinese.
Matt Pottinger.
Matt Pottinger, yeah. So it's not like Trump was just like, I will do whatever I want without any expert advice. That's like, no. I think that's, but I think like the Trump administration's China policy has been like remarkably coherent, increasingly coherent, especially over the last year.
Mm-hmm. And you made a good point earlier about how he has been working with allies.
I mean, I think that, we just don't see a lot of it necessarily because it's a pretty niche topic, and
you don't see the Marshall Islands making headlines,
right? Or like exactly like the U.S. like Pacific Pledge, where it talks about how it's going to help all these little South Pacific islands, and it really has to do with China, but you'd have to kind of connect them. Yeah,
right. And also the U.S.'s $60 billion pledge to help development in Africa.
It was, I believe, more than just Africa.
But at any rate,
there's to counter Chinese Belt and Road investment. One thing I think that is important for people to understand is, regardless of who the next president is, there is a corporate interest that has vested interest in China that wants to push things back to the way they used to be with China. Those multi-billion-dollar corporations obviously have a lot of money and power and influence, but the American people also have a lot of power and influence. And so if the American people themselves are talking to their representatives saying they care about China, this is what they want, then that is also a powerful force in U.S. politics. You can't discount the people.
And I would like to see more of that. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I think that, there's an idea, I think that, like, if a Biden administration comes in, that, like, things will go back to normal. Because, I mean, whether you like him or hate him, Trump is a huge disruptor. I think like Trump supporters and Trump like critics would agree that Trump
Yeah.
is basically a disruptor.
Yeah, it's just whether you like that or you hate that.
Yeah. So Trump being out of office, then like the Biden administration would come in and then like we could kind of like all go back to not really caring about politics and like go back to like feeling normal about things and have a normal president who's doing normal president things. And, then like there's like an idea that like we don't have to like hold the Biden administration accountable anymore for what they do because whatever they do will be normal.
You mean the
thing.
Harris administration?
Wait,
Ooh.
ooh, okay. Well, we're not going to go into that.
Blame it on the coffee.
Yeah, great. Anyway, I totally lost my train of thought again. So, but my point is that the idea that like, if Biden comes in, then we can all stop paying attention, I think is pretty dangerous.
Oh, yeah. That like, oh, all right, everything's under control again. No longer need to pay attention.
Well, no matter who the next president is, we're still going to keep doing our shows.
Yeah, I think that especially the China angle is going to be pretty interesting if a Biden administration comes in. I think that, like, Xi Jinping, if I were Xi Jinping, I'd be kind of relieved right now.
Well, I bet he's on the edge of his seat wanting to see how this election actually wraps up.
I mean, they already congratulated Biden.
Oh, it's done then.
I mean, as long as the Communist Party said it, it must be true.
Well, I mean,
well, for more of our coverage on the U.S. election, check out America Uncovered. So once again, thank you for watching China Unscripted.
Can we end on something a little better than that, though?
Oh.
Well, regardless of who the next president is, I do have hope that the American people will keep, standing up for what's right and supporting the Chinese citizens and standing up for our values.
Yeah, and the continued bipartisan agreement about human rights in China being a threat.
Yeah, I have to say that like I am impressed with how much the US government as a whole has brought up human rights in China over the last couple years. This was not the case 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
No, ma'am.
And hopefully that can continue. And I think that there is some hope that like there would be things that would carry over to a Biden administration in terms of China policy because some of this stuff is bipartisan. But then there's also the danger of like what I talked about, the political side of like feeling like you have to just do something different because you can't do what the Trump administration did.
The danger of a China reset.
Yeah. Well, on that note,
thanks for watching China Unscripted. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Jung.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
Talk to you next time.